Welcome again to the Brand Ambassador Series. Ross is with us, and well, Ross is here because Glenlivet is a great single malt Scotch.
That it is.
Thanks a lot for being here.
Not a problem, sir.
We started without you, but we'll go through those.
Okay.
Glenlivet, great Scotch everywhere.
Yes.
Why? How? Please tell us.
Glenlivet's been around since the early 1800s. It's been a brand that a lot of people kind of are indoctrinated into Scotch whiskey. It's one of the first, especially the 12-year-old, it's one of the first Scotches that they ever have when they get into Scotch. Usually they try and they go, yeah, it's good, I like it, but it's a beginner Scotch. So they end up running the gamut as far as, basically what whiskeys are. American, bourbon, Canadian, Irish, Scotch. They run the gamut, they try everything. When they come back to something like Glenlivet 12, first and foremost, they realize that there's a lot more craftsmanship and subtlety going on than they gave it credit for initially. Second of all, they appreciate it a whole lot more. There's a lot more going on. It's an unbelievable Scotch to start out with. Yeah. Glenlivet 12-year-old, as you said, is pretty much everywhere. You can find it almost anywhere, whether it's a hole-in-the-wall bar or the highest end place. Everybody has Glenlivet 12. Most people don't know that there's any other marks in the family. So today we're going to go through a little bit of that.
Okay. Glenlivet 12, what's the maturation there?
Okay, everything is aged exclusively in American oak from the day it was born up until the age of 12. So then it sits in the American oak barrels. It's then married together in the batch. They chill filter it, then bottle it. Okay. The difference between that and the 15-year-old is simply that everything up until the age of 12 is that same 12-year-old. At the age of 12, they split off between 10 to 15% of it, put it into French oak barrels. They used to house sherry. They let that sit side by side with all the other barrels, and then at the age of 15, they marry them together, chill filter, and bottle. Now, for the Nadura...
Nadura is a newer addition. I'm not saying it's brand new. It's been here for a few years.
Correct. It is one of the newer ones to the family. Right. Nadura is actually Scotch Gaelic for natural. This is our non-chill filtered cast strength expression. Basically what that means is, first and foremost, this is aged exclusively in American oak, the same way that you found in the 12-year-old. This has not seen any of the chill filtration process, which does two things. First and foremost, takes out some of the oils and fatty acids you traditionally find in a Scotch whiskey when it's first distilled and after it's matured. Number two, it adds a little bit of water to bring it down to a more consistent alcohol level. This has not gone through that, so it's a much higher alcohol proof, has a little bit more of a potency to it, but with a healthy dose of water, this one truly comes alive. Right. Okay? The 18-year-old in comparison, up until the age of 12, once again, still the same product. Then they split off between 20 to 25% of it, put it into both Spanish and French oak barrels that used to house sherry, let them sit side by side. This one is chill filtered. It is opened up quite a bit, and then they bottle it. So what you're going to taste here is a little bit more of a well-balanced, well-crafted point to where you're getting natural sweetness up front, spice in the center, oaky and nutty on the sides and back. Extremely well-balanced. The 21-year-old overall has the most Christmas cake kind of a feel. So basically what you're going to get is a lot of natural sweetness to it. The reason for that is at the age of 12, they split off between 30 to 35%, put it exclusively into Oloroso sherry. So it sits side by side, pulls on a lot more of a deep tannin to it. So if you think deep red, almost black fruits, plums, cherries, currants, dates, things like that, pulls out a lot more of that deep characteristic to it.
Very good. So then all of these are quite different in the end.
Yes, very different from each other.
But it starts with the same distillate.
Everything is only made, Glenlivet Distillery only makes one product. Right. Everything comes out the same way. Subtle variations in the maturation give you a very different product.
So if you know your whiskey pretty well and if you can take the alcohol level, you'd go for the Nadura?
You could. I typically gravitate a little bit more towards the 18-year-old because it's at that point where it's still active enough. It has body, it has substance, but it's mature enough now that it's not going to have the edge to it. It's got so much more subtle, classic things going on in it.
You mentioned earlier the Glenlivet, saying the Glenlivet.
Correct.
Why?
The reason for that, when Glenlivet was started, it was called Glenlivet. Glenlivet was the #1 Scotch whiskey known before it was even legal to manufacture Scotch whiskey, to the point where in 1822, King of England came up to his new territory of Scotland and was calling for Glenlivet by name. Okay? In 1823, Scotch whiskey was legalized. You could apply for a patent to be able to make it. George Smith, our founder, was the first one to actually be able to do that, but up until the 1860s, new companies that were just starting up wanted to tap onto the notoriety that Glenlivet had. So they would, whether it was Macallan, whether it was Laphroaig, whether it was Strathisla, which was one of the Chivas distilleries, they were all putting Glenlivet on their name just to associate some quality with it. As the British Empire was expanding and Scotch whiskey was being sent all over the world, people would open it up and go, oh, it must be a new expression of Glenlivet. But there was no quality board, so at the same token, it probably wasn't very good. So in the 1860s, George Smith actually applied for the legal right to be called the Glenlivet. We're the only ones who can have that name. So that's why it has the before Glenlivet.
Okay, very good. When talking about the distillery, is there something special to the stills, to the fermentation, to the yeast, to the water?
Nothing drastic as far as those are concerned, other than the water. We've been using the same strain of yeast for almost 200 years. We've been getting barley from the same farmers for nearly 200 years. The major thing that we have that nobody else does is the actual water source. It's coming from Josie's well. It's extremely mineral rich. It's sitting over a limestone shelf, so the aquifer, as it's water being pulled through, is so mineral rich, it's giving such a deep characteristic to the actual Scotch, to the point where Glenlivet, a few years back, went to expand their distillery. They made an identical distillery across the street from their current one, and they literally, down to the dents in the still, made it exactly the same way. They tried manufacturing Scotch across the street, pulling up from the same water, and they couldn't do it. The only thing they could figure out was that the pipe that they had pulling in the main distillery from the well was nearly 200 years old, and it had nearly 200 years of mineral buildup. And that was giving some of the characteristics from the hard water actually into the flavor of the Scotch. So what they did with the new distillery, they turned that into a gift shop, and then they ended up doubling the size of the current distillery, which opened up a few years ago.
All right, so water does have a great impact.
Drastic impact,
okay.
Yes.
But it also means that people can go and visit.
Correct. It is an open to the public distillery. You can do tours. Highly suggest you do so if you're ever over there.
Right.
It's a fantastic time to go over, pretty much any time of year. Very helpful staff, so feel free if you're ever over in Scotland to drop on by.
Very good. Certainly you can find the Glenlivet in Scotland.
Correct.
If you can find it in Japan, in the heart of Kentucky, you can find it everywhere.
Correct.
You must have great stocks of that.
I do. Me personally, I have some good stocks.
I'm sure your apartment is well fitted.
There are actually some unbelievable stocks that are owned by the Chivas Brothers company, who owns Glenlivet. They have 4 major warehouses or aging facilities where they may have upwards of 52 different warehouses holding anywhere from 150 to 200,000 barrels in each one. Huge facilities. They're basically the size of a football field. And if, say for example, they start the year with 52 full warehouses full of Scotch, by the end of the year, due to the evaporation rate, the Angel share, it's usually down an entire warehouse at the end of that, just due to the amount of volume that they have on campus. So
well, imagine if those warehouses were in Kentucky.
Yeah, it'd be going even faster.
So you've got a lot of Scotch whiskey aging there.
Correct.
What about what sells most? Glenlivet 12?
Yes, worldwide Glenlivet 12 is still the one driving the force behind the brand.
Who likes Glenlivet 18 best? Is it somebody over in Asia, or is it somebody over here?
Actually, the U.S. is still the #1 market for Glenlivet worldwide.
Why is that?
Back after World War II, after troops had been stationed in Scotland and acquired a taste for what Scotch whiskey was, they were stationed up there waiting for the Germans to invade. The Germans clearly didn't get very far, so they had a lot of time to kill. So they ended up raiding some of the warehouses, and they acquired that taste for Scotch whiskey. When they came back home after the war, they ended up craving some of the Glenlivet because it was the one they knew was the highest quality. Glenlivet was one of the first companies to come over, and it's been #1 in North America since then, #2 in the world as far as sales go.
Right.
It's biggest here simply because the single malt craze took off here before anywhere else in the world as far as volume is concerned. There were so many companies that came in that were blended scotches right after the war, and the caliber of them wasn't always the best. Chivas Regal was seen as the upper echelon, which today Chivas Regal 12-year-old is still a fantastic blended scotch, but it's not the upper echelon of what blended scotch is. And so getting through what some of those lower quality blended scotches were, Glenlivet was a tried and true, fantastic
Right.
thing that's been handed down from generation to generation, whether it's from a boss to a coworker, or whether it's from a father to son, whatever the case is. It's been years and years being handed down from one group to the next.